Hello, everybody. Today, we have a real treat for you. If you really think about it, we often talk about real estate investing and especially residential real estate investing. But when you go to the bigger picture, like some people talk about infrastructure. One thing that I believe is kind of a summary term that you could use in real estate, and that is facilities, right? Like a facility, like a single family home is a facility for a single family. Like an apartment complex is a facility for apartments with multiple families or people living in it. So when you look around, driving around, walking around and doing business, you will probably see many different facilities. And today we have a special treat for you because we have Chris Larsen, and he, besides other things, is specializing on one of those facilities, and those are car washes. And you may have never really thought about, okay, is the car wash renting the building, or is the building and the operation of the car wash the same and it's really specialized? So we'll talk about it, and I hope you're going to be interested to find out how, number one, can you actually make money with car washes and what kind of cash flow can be expected. So let's listen to what Chris has to share. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Ideal Investor Show, where we try to find a path to early retirement, reach the time freedom point, and generate passive income. And as we are in season 2, we are looking for people who can help us find all kinds of diverse ways to generate cash flow. And we have one of those experts with us today, and that is Chris Larsen. Welcome to the show.
Axel, it's a pleasure to be here. You are the second Axel in less than a week that I'm talking to.
Yeah, hey, we are multiplying left and right.
That's right.
So besides being welcome at the show, as we always start, our audience is obviously interested. How did you get to what you're doing with the different investment options? How did you get into real estate? Tell us a little bit how that all came together.
Yeah, and I'd be happy to do that. Got my start in college. And by the way, if you want to really dive into my story, you can get a free copy of my book, nextlevelincome.com. Yep. So nextlevelincome.com, click on the book link, and I'll even send you, if you're listening today, a free copy if you put in your address. But I was in college, and my passion at the time was bicycles. I was racing bicycles, which I started doing 30 years ago now. So just after I turned 14, and in between my freshman and sophomore years, my best friend, my training partner, my roommate passed away. And I raced for another year, and I had gotten into the stock market. I was very interested in that, but I quit racing because I realized that there was more to life. You know, I wasn't really getting the meaning and the excitement out of it anymore. And I'll never forget crossing the finish line of the second memorial race for my friend, and I should have been happy. I was in great shape. I'd won the race in fairly dominant fashion. I was at the peak of my fitness I'd ever been in. I'd just upgraded to a Category 1 cyclist, which basically, Axel, means you can become a pro. Okay. And it just meant nothing to me. So I went back to school after that weekend. I was in college, and I quit. I quit cycling. So I was entering my junior year, and I'm kind of like thinking to myself, I'm an engineering student. I don't want to be an engineer. Now I'm not racing my bike anymore. And I promised myself that I wouldn't have any regrets. And I thought, okay, I want to live life to the fullest. I want to honor the life that I've been given. I want to honor the life of my friend. And I also knew that you needed cash flow to do it, right? So I set out on a path to become financially independent, which led me to real estate ultimately.
Okay, very cool. Now, I think it's interesting opportunity to dig a little deeper when you say, well, I set out on this path. Were there any triggers? Did you read any books, or somebody said, hey, Chris, you want to probably become financially independent. Here are the 5 steps. How did that? Probably not. But how did that actually happen?
Yeah, so I had a family friend who gave me a money magazine, and I'll never forget it. Had this exponential compounding curve, right?
Okay.
And it was talking about starting a Roth IRA. So that's how I got started investing in the stock market. But after day trading for a long period of time, and I did well. I was making $5,000 a month as a junior in college. I realized that the volatility really was not what I wanted to do for the next 20 years of my life. So I read 250 books. So it wasn't, unfortunately, I didn't have somebody that said, hey, do these 5 steps. But I read 250 books, And I determined that the ability to buy real estate with the leverage, the ability to control your entry point, your exit point, and the cash flow was really appealing to me. And I got started probably just like, a lot of you listening today, which was in residential real estate. So I bought a portfolio of residential properties, said, okay, $10,000 a month coming in every month. If I can just pay off these mortgages, that's it, I'm free. And that was my very simple plan, which eventually evolved into what we do today, which is commercial real estate, multifamily, self-storage, mobile home parks, hotels, car washes, as you mentioned slightly earlier in the show as well.
Okay, yeah, that's very cool. Now, one thing, and I've seen this in the comments for the show and in interviews and stuff, is that people oftentimes say, okay, I hear what your guest, in this case you, Chris, actually said, but what I didn't hear is where did the money come from to build this residential portfolio? How did you do that?
So really, that's a great point. How do you get started in anything? You need capital. And that's the great thing about real estate. I bought that first property with only $3,000. Now, $3,000, anybody listening can come up with almost any. I mean, my children could come up with that amount of money if they put their mind to it. They're 11 and 13, by the way. My mom co-signed on the loan. And with that $3,000, I was able to buy a townhouse, which was 3 bedrooms, quote unquote, 3 units. And I bought the place next door after that. I formed my own little 6-unit apartment, if you will, and just went from there.
And when you said your mom co-signed, does that mean that she also gave you some of the down payment money, or?
It was my money. Yeah, my money, but she was the co-signer. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, if you say you got it for 3,000, did you get it? I mean, if you use it as an investment, I mean, I'm just trying to imagine, either it must have been relatively affordable or somehow you got a
$90,000. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But $90,000 owner, you needed to buy that owner occupancy then, right? To be able to do it with.
Yes. So I live there, and it's what we call a house hack today.
Yeah, or burn method or something like that. I mean, even if you don't renovate, can leave one of the R's out
exactly.
Of it. But, and that, just to summarize and tell me if I'm saying it the right way. To me, for our audience, what it really means is if you want to get started, you can actually look for a property where you might even say, well, that's not my dream property. That's not where I want to raise my family, but it might be a good property to generate long-term rental income. And depending on the jurisdiction, and it's a little different, most places you need to live 1 year. Some areas in the country, they require you to live in it 2 years. But if you think about it, $90,000, like you said, Chris, you get it for what was that, 3% or so, 4% down payment. So now you own it. You have your mortgage on it. If you say, let's say it's 2 years, that would be the longest I've ever heard it would take. You move out after 2 years and start renting it. You got it basically for 3 or 4% down, right?
Exactly.
And you can buy the next one for the same thing, and during those 2 years, probably find a way to get another $3,000 or $4,000 together. Now, I always want to point this out because I think when you are relatively young, like you were when you started, you can take, I don't know, probably 3 or 4 times that kind of cycle and add it together. And you may have spent 5 to 8 years to do that. And now you have at least a starting portfolio and probably increase in value. You have passive income, all those kind of things. That's really, really a great starting point for people that are relatively new and young versus somebody who's a little more mature, where you then have to start, okay, how can I literally do the investing, right? Like literally invest in an investment property, which in most cases you have to probably come up with 20% or 25% the down payment. Now, I saw this point that you made earlier about the volatility in the stock market and you transitioning from residential then into commercial. How would you describe the difference in the cash flow opportunities? And I think maybe it might also be really helpful for the audience if you describe a little bit the different kinds of commercial that you're actually doing.
Yeah. So what's interesting is that property I bought when I was 21, I sold it 15 years later, did a 1031 exchange. I bought an office, a 7-unit office downtown here in Asheville, and it was on the market for $700,000. It was owned by the bank. I went to the bank, negotiated. I ended up paying $525,000 for that property. I put another $25,000 into it. So I did a 1031 exchange. So remember, I took my equity from that $3,000 investment, bought a $525,000 property, added another $25,000 to it. 2 years later, refinanced, and it was appraised for over $800,000. So not only did I pull out my original equity I pulled out $200,000 total. So now I have $200,000 in my pocket. I invested that $200,000 in a passive syndication and a multifamily syndication. So now I had over $3,000 a month coming in cash flow. And I also had the cash flow from that $200,000 investment in a passive syndication, which was about $1,000 a month. So now I had $4,500 a month, approximately on average, coming from that original $3,000 investment. So that's just kind of a continuation of that story, which occurred over 20 years. But Axel, what we do, and the reason I got into commercial is because it's scalable. Most people know, you do residential, and at some point you get to a point you're like, I don't really want to own any more single family homes, where you have to hire somebody, it turns into a business. It's a lot harder to manage, say, 100 single family homes than it is to manage one 100 unit apartment building. And also the trouble with single family homes, now there are ways you could sell them and package them together as a portfolio, but they don't trade at the same valuation as a multifamily property. So the reason I got into commercial property, and again, I outline this in my book, is because it's scalable. You have the ability to literally buy 10 units, 100 units, 1,000 units using the same strategy. For instance, multifamily, which would translate very well. You can very easily hire property management companies. Obviously, you have to find good ones, but it's easy to find a property management company for this type of real estate versus, say, a car wash. And then the other thing is you have the ability to get non-recourse debt. And that's one of the other things. So, if you're a professional out there, I work with a lot of doctors and surgeons from the 18 years I spent in the medical device industry. You may not want any more liability. And this allows you the ability to limit your liability when it comes to loans and those sorts of things. So we can talk a little bit more about the different types of commercial real estate that we do now, but that's kind of an overview about how I ended up in that
absolutely.
space.
Yeah, that's very cool. And thanks for giving that kind of like a quick high-level summary. And for those who listen to us and just heard non-recourse loan and what that really means, in a nutshell, there are different percentages to regular mortgages, but I think the best way to understand it is, yes, the amount of the money that comes from you versus what comes from the lender is higher. But on the flip side is it doesn't matter how much income or anything you make. It's all based on the fact of how well does the property perform. And that's all makes sense. I mean, the easiest that I've seen is to say, okay, you have, let's say, $1 million property, you come up with half, the bank comes up with half, and then they know you don't even need to bother how much money you make, because they will always, if you don't pay, the property is worth at least half, and that's all they need to basically be whole again. And they don't have to recourse your income. They just need to have the property and be good with that. Now, you just kind of casually on the side, you mentioned car wash, and I've seen on your website, you also have mobile home parks. Tell us a little bit. Car wash is definitely a little unusual. We had somebody who does syndication. We had somebody who does storage units, but you're the first with car wash. So
all right.
Tell us a little bit how that works and what's interesting about it.
Yeah. So I first looked in the car wash space several years ago. My uncle and I looked at purchasing a location not too far from where I live here in Asheville, North Carolina. Ultimately didn't move forward with that location. I had a coaching client and they had 2 locations. So learned about car washes along the way. So when my partner and I discussed it here in the past couple of years, I said, yeah, these are great businesses. Now let's take a quick step back, Axel. So first off, talking about multifamily and self-storage and mobile homes, that's kind of the core of what we do. And those are traditional commercial real estate. I brought up commercial office as well. When you start to talk about car washes, short-term rentals, hotels, assisted or senior housing, these are going to be what I would call operating real estate. And this is real estate that has a business basically, on top of it. And the success of this piece of real estate is directly proportional to the success of the business. And it's much different. I mentioned it's relatively easy to find a property management company for a multifamily real estate or self-storage, especially self-storage like ours, where there's not a lot of employees. You have a regional manager. A lot of stuff is automated, very straightforward. When it comes to car washes, when you have 5, 6, 8 employees at a location, the success of that car wash is highly dependent on that. So we have built out an operating team to run that. But the reason we got into the space, a few different things. One, it's largely fractured. So if you look at the multifamily space, about 85% of the multifamily space is owned by institutional investors. Only about 15% of the car wash space is owned by large institutional groups or private equity.
Yeah.
So you have all these mom and pops. So we can buy from these small operators that own 1, 2, 3, 4 washes or less, and they may not be running things as efficiently as we do.
Right.
In addition, we can come in, we can bring in our staff that we train, we teach them how to sell, and we're selling membership. So this isn't a complex sell like I did when I was in the OR and selling medical devices. It's a pretty straightforward membership model. We bring in, our colors and our vacuums and, just our experience. And I would liken it, and this is what we like to say internally, we want to be the Chick-fil-A of car washes. So I can go to one of my favorite restaurants here and buy a chicken sandwich, and it might cost me $12 or $15 to buy that chicken sandwich. It's fantastic. It's got pimento cheese on it. It's spicy, but I can go to Chick-fil-A and pay a third of that or less and get a really good chicken sandwich. It's not going to be as good, but I'm going to get it quicker. It's going to be predictable. People are nice at Chick-fil-A. We want the same thing. We know that you can go and have your car detailed for $200, and that person's going to do a better job than we do at our express tunnel wash, but not in 5 minutes. And you're going to have a good experience. Your kids are going to enjoy going through with the lights and everything. And what's nice is if you can improve the income, improve the operating expenses, improve the EBITDA or the net operating income of these locations, when you package them up together, not only do you get the increased value from that increased revenue that you're generating, but you also get a 50 to 100% increase in the exit multiple than you do if you're one of these smaller operators. And this was if you're going to sell 50, 100, 200 locations rolled up together. So the metrics can get really exciting when you look at it that way.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Now, since we said, one of the umbrella topics that we want to address in our conversation is cash flow. Is there instantaneous cash flow, or do you have to basically wait until you modernize an existing facility so that it has all the stuff that you just mentioned? Or is it sometimes this way, sometimes that way? I'm sure our audience would like to know, how is it if you take over one of those 3 or 4 location operations?
Yeah, great question. So first off, pretty much everything we do is going to be a value add strategy. And we are coming in and buying stable businesses that have cash flow from day one. So almost everything we do. We have done some small development deals and those sorts of things. Those are going to be a little bit outside that scope. But yeah, cash flow day one, improve cash flow during the life of the ownership or the time that we own it, and then sell for that increased appreciation. So our rules are capital protection, number 2, income, number 3, capital appreciation, number 4, tax benefits.
Okay, yeah, that's very cool. Now I have a personal question that is, I have seen, and admittedly, I used to go to a car wash on relatively regular basis because I always like to drive nice cars. But, I drove up, I looked what they have, the Master or the Turtle or the race car, whatever the name of the wash is.
Yeah.
And then I paid either cash or with a credit card. They vacuumed it, they took it through. They always asked me if I wanted a detail, obviously. Yeah. And that was pretty much the traditional way to go. And then I started seeing more and more that car washes throughout the area started saying, well, you can also do, I think, $35 or $45 membership and basically, quote unquote, wash as often as you need, so to speak.
Yeah.
If you're driving through a muddy hole every week or whatever for some reason. And I've always,
or this time of year with the pollen, right? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. Well, I've always been curious. I'm sure that operators like you, and like I said, you're the first one, so I have to ask you the question, but is this a deliberate psychology or psychological approach to say, okay, well, if somebody like me washes their car once a month and they get a membership for, let's say, $45, and normally they would pay $22.55 or whatever the number is, they really come 2 or 3 or 4 times now that they have the membership. So is there actually a revenue benefit on having the membership versus people paying individually?
Great question. So first off, I know you're in California, Axel, because you said the membership's $45. We normally start $20 out here in North Carolina.
I'm only telling you what the signs say.
Yeah, exactly. But let's do some math, right? Like, so let's say we charge $20 for a membership and our base wash is $12. Okay. So that means you have to wash your car twice per month for you to have an economic benefit, right? And that's typical. You're probably going to see, if you go through twice a month, it's going to make more sense to get a membership. Now, what's interesting is, do you know what the average number of times a member washes their car per month?
0.5 or something like that.
It's about 2, actually. And if we can wash that car for $2 or $3, there's a significant profit margin there. Right. And the other benefit is, we get that recurring revenue, and we actually do a weekly charge. So, if you're paying $5 a week, even my son's like, Dad, that's $1 a day. I'm like, yeah, if you're counting weekdays, it's less than $1 a day if you count all 7 days. So you're like, okay, for $1 a day, if you wash your car, I tell my wife, like, go once a week. Like, that makes a lot of sense, But if you don't have to do that. You can go, once a month and get your car washed and do that. But yeah, typically, about 2 times a month is going to make economic sense for the consumer. Obviously, there's an optimal amount that we want. Obviously, if somebody pays a membership and never goes, that's going to be beneficial for us. But that's not a good long-term model either, right? So we want it to be a win-win.
I was thinking a little bit more when I mentioned the psychology of it. I was just curious because I've talked to somebody who tried to offer me an investment opportunity in a gym, basically, or like a fitness place. And I said, well, I don't know. I mean, how does this really work? And without going into all the details, one of the things he mentioned is there's a psychology that people want change when there are some triggers, like, New Year's resolution or stuff like that, or the friends or the girlfriends or whatever, they all want to do something. Then they sign up, and they typically sign up for a year or something like that.
Yeah.
But after 2 or 3 or maybe 4 months, the frequency of coming gets less and less and less. And I've always been wondering in other membership kind of approaches to what extent something like that is also the case, because I think when the charge is not too high, and I mean, weekly is probably somewhat of a reminder, because if somebody sees their statement and there are 4 or 5 weekly charges on it in one monthly statement, it sticks out a little more. But I would honestly admit, whether it were a $20 charge or a $45 charge, it's not that it sticks out so much that I would, where do these $45 go every month?
I should clarify, we charge $5 a week every 4 weeks.
Yeah, but if you go, I don't know how diligent people in
it doesn't stick out that much.
Yeah, it's $20 or even $40 among all the other stuff that's in your bank statement. I'm always wondering, these kind of things, is there a certain psychology behind it to say, okay, you have it, you can do it, but it's not so pressing from a financial perspective. If you catch yourself that you haven't done it for 6 weeks, okay, well, then you can still go, obviously, and maybe you want to make it up in the next 6 weeks,
Yeah, I'll tell you what, when I get the monthly charge, I ask my wife, like, how many times have you been this month? So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, you have it nice that your wife is actually taking the car to the wash. I would say, hey, if you want to know, you go yourself. So,
well, she's got her car, I have mine. So it's like, okay.
Yeah. Okay, cool. Now, one of the other things that you spoke about, the 1031 exchange, which is kind of like, in a sense, a tax aspect for these different things that you mentioned that you offer, like the commercial real estate, the car wash, the storage units, those kind of things. Can you give a little bit of a slight light on how is that from a tax perspective? Are they all similar, or are they very different, or how does that look?
Great question. So I like to say, if you're doing real estate right, you're not paying taxes on the income. And what I mean is, I mentioned kind of our hierarchy, which is capital preservation, capital appreciation, cash flow or income, which I know is the topic of this season's shows, appreciation, and then tax benefits. And the great thing about commercial real estate, and this is one of the other things I talk about in my book, is that when you get into commercial real estate, you can do things like a cost segregation analysis. I just got a K1 for one of the car wash offerings we had. It was actually the tax deduction, or the K1 showed a loss that was greater than a passive investor's investment. So how is that possible? And the reason is you have this bonus depreciation that flows through to investors from these types of investments. So we have an accounting group, engineering accounting group, that comes in. They break out all the types of depreciating assets within these pieces of property. And then the IRS says, per their rules, you can depreciate these instead of over 27 and a half or 39 years in terms of commercial real estate straight line depreciation. We can do 5, 7, 15 year depreciation, and even pull that forward even into the first year. And a lot of this comes from the 2017 tax bill that passed.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for explaining that. And just for the audience to realize, theoretically, for what we do, like with our residential real estate investing strategies, anybody who buys an investment property, whether it's a single family, duplex, fourplex, anything like that, below the commercial size, could theoretically do it too. The main reason experience why people don't do it is because on a single family house, it probably is somewhere in the $2,500 area to get it done. And then the question really becomes, okay, does it really make that much of a difference after I've paid that, even though you could argue it's an expense? Because all you do is identify the few things that depreciate faster than the standard linear depreciation. So, like you might say, okay, well, my water heater is maybe 8 or 10 years instead of 27 years or stuff like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Those is maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years at the most. So people understand that, but I just wanted to make sure this is not a special thing for these kinds of things that Chris is doing. It's just a matter of, does it make sense to make the expense or have the expense? Now, when you go to your 100-unit apartment complex, it totally makes sense to spend the money because, yes, it's probably more than 2,500, but the ratio versus 100 units is probably way better.
Yeah. Okay. Can I add one thing, Axel? One thing I learned personally, and again, I'm not an accountant, I'm not a CPA, I'm not giving tax advice, but one of the cool things is if you're a real estate investor, you can blend these strategies together. And what I mean is if you own residential real estate and you invest in a syndication, one of these commercial offerings, some of these tax benefits can go back and forth on your Schedule E on your taxes, which is really nice. So again, talk to your accountant. But what I found and what a lot of our investors have found is that this isn't mutually exclusive. So you can take your strategies and can blend them together and actually get a better overall return in your total portfolio by blending these investments together, which is really cool.
Yeah, it's totally cool. But at the same time, I think we have now established, even though we're all basically in it for cash flow, that especially when there is such a diversification like you have in the different offerings that you do, Chris, that there's a lot to learn. And I hope that's a good segue to say that you have something that helps people to learn something about it. So please go ahead and explain it.
No, thanks, Axel. So first off, you can get a free copy of my book, as I mentioned earlier, at nextlevelincome.com. Just click on the book link. Number two, we have a new course out. It'll help you make more money, keep more money. We talk about a lot of these tax strategies. We have tax accountants that go in there. We even have a estate planning module that my attorney put in there, gave us a whole program for free inside of ours, as well as how to analyze these different investments. And I know you talk about how to help out listeners and investors figure out when their freedom day is. We have a great spreadsheet included as well in the course. The course is $1,500, but your listeners are going to get 33% off. They get almost $500 off of that. And they just have to use the code Axel, AXEL. And we'll have the link here that I'll pass on to you to put in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much. And thanks for your generous gift for our audience to get access to that, because I know people want to diversify, and I'm preaching that they should diversify and not just be in one thing, even though initially it might be the easiest way. You start like that. I started like that, to start in residential. And then if somebody wants to scale and grow, go into these other areas. Okay, with that being said, we're coming kind of towards the end of the show, and I always ask the same two questions. The first one being, if you could meet anybody, Chris, alive or not, who would it be and why?
If I could, what was it? If I could meet anyone?
And anybody, past or present, who would it be?
It'd be my father. He passed away when I was 5.
Oh, okay, cool. And obviously you wanted to know a little bit about him, I guess.
Yeah, I would. I want him to teach me how to fly.
Oh, did he fly?
He was a pilot, yes, sir. Yeah.
Okay, I was too, so cool thing. All right, and then the second question is, if you had a time machine, now you have already taken care of the thing with your dad, where would you go and why?
Ooh, that is a good question. So there's this debate. There's a recent show on Netflix called Something Apocalypse. And there's a lot of questions about like how the pyramids came to be. And, some of these large civilizations occurred that appear to have happened, 12, 15,000 or even more years ago. I'd love to go back in time and see exactly how did they put up the pyramids? Like what technologies were they using back then? And it'd be pretty wild to see that.
Yeah, I think I would agree. I mean, there's actually, if you're really truly interested in the topic and some of the alternative thought experiments, I would say. There's a guy by the name of Erich von Däniken, the original German author, who wrote a whole book series about what if somebody came and taught the people at the time how to be able to do these kind of things.
Exactly.
And on first glance, I remember when he came out with his first book, everybody kind of, okay, it wasn't social media and stuff like that, but everybody basically tried to say, oh, this guy is completely nuts, completely crazy. Until they read their first book and said, there's a lot of evidence. He's not just saying stuff or making stuff up or telling stories. He basically is one of these guys where you say, okay, here is the evidence that I have collected. I have a really hard time not coming to the following conclusion. Right? And then he kept writing books that all go basically in the same direction, just from all kinds of, and that's the crazy thing that I thought was so fascinating is he became or was able over time to visit different places around the globe. And obviously he had a certain way of searching for stuff. You can say there was a bias. He was looking for certain things, and when something even just barely looked like it, then he thought he found it. But when you do this for like 40 years and you write book after book after book, it feels like the evidence gets stronger and stronger, to say, well, did they just suddenly, somebody came along and said, I can build a perfect wall without any mortar, and the rocks are perfectly aligned with each other, even though that doesn't exist in nature. Right? That was always my example, that somewhere in South Africa, they found stuff like that, same like the
the Mayan ruins in the middle of the Amazon, Göbekli Tepe, the pyramids.
Not only how did they move them, but how did they make them that they fit together like that?
Oh, yeah, these giant, it just jogged my memory. It's called Ancient Apocalypse, and it's a little series. You'll enjoy it on Netflix. I think it's 7 or 8 series.
Yeah, and everybody in the audience, if you want to dive into that stuff, that's kind of like an extra service for today's session.
There you go. Yeah, not cash flow related, but there you go.
Yeah, exactly. So just as a reminder, Chris, thank you so much. Thanks for giving us the book for free and 30% off the new course. And hopefully we can do it again sometime.
I'd like that. Axel, great being with you here today.
Yeah, same here. Thank you. Thanks for listening, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode of the Ideal Investor Show. More info and the links we mentioned during the show are in the show notes, or you can go to our website at idealwealthgrower.com and sign up for the Apple Podcast link. And if you like to talk to me, sign up for a strategy call. Hopefully you want to share what you learned with your network and bring more people in. We are really eager to hear your comments. And until next time, be well, stay safe, and ciao.